All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into a really fascinating sermon that uses these two legendary kings to ask a question that feels, well, more relevant than ever. And that question is, what's the real price of wealth? So, to get us thinking, the sermon kicks off with this clever little thought experiment. It's called the balance game. And the whole point is to make you figure out where your line is. That point where you'd be willing to trade your comfort or maybe even your dignity for cold, hard cash. Okay, so first up, it's a pretty straightforward trade-off, right? 6 hours is a long time to be on your feet, for sure. But hey, $1,500 for a little discomfort? I think most of us would at least have to think about it. What would you do? And now, the game changes. It gets way more personal. This isn't about being uncomfortable anymore, nope. This is about dignity. Some total stranger, doesn't matter how rich they are, wants to slap you in the face for money. For $2,000? The sermon suggests that most of us, assuming we're not in a desperate situation, would say, get lost. Absolutely not. It's an insult, right? It's an attack on our self-respect. But what if the number wasn't 2,000? What if it was $1 million for one single slap? Suddenly the calculation changes, doesn't it? And the sermon argues that whatever that number is, the number where you finally say yes, that reveals something really deep about the value you secretly place on your own dignity. This whole modern dilemma is actually the perfect gateway to a story that's thousands of years old, a timeless cautionary tale from Greek mythology that explores this exact same idea. You can see just how quickly this dream turns into a complete nightmare. I mean, at first, Midas is over the moon. He has infinite wealth. But that joy just evaporates when he realizes he can't eat, he can't drink. And then the absolute tragedy. He hugs his own daughter, and the one thing he loves most in the world is lost to his greed. It's a devastating lesson. When everything is gold, nothing can actually live. So, from this ancient myth, the sermon pivots straight into the history books, to a real person, the biblical King Solomon. This was a guy whose real-life wealth was so insane, it kind of makes the Midas story seem almost believable. Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. His kingdom was so unbelievably prosperous that silver, a precious metal for pretty much all of human history, was treated like common gravel, was basically worthless. Literally every cup, every plate in his palace was made of pure gold. And his massive trade fleet was constantly bringing back the wonders of the world. Gold, ivory, even exotic animals like apes and peacocks. This wasn't just being rich. This was an overwhelming global display of power. So the conclusion was pretty clear. By every single earthly measure, money, smart, power, Solomon was at the very top. He had it all. There was literally no one on the planet who could even come close. But this is where the sermon takes a really sharp turn, because all that dazzling success, it wasn't the happy ending. It was actually the beginning of a very subtle but very real spiritual crisis. And that's the question that sits right at the heart of this entire story. When you're surrounded by that much luxury, that much security, when every single material need you could ever have is met, what happens to your soul? What's the hidden cost of having everything? This slide really lays out the central conflict perfectly. You see, centuries before Solomon was even born, there was this divine law that specifically warned future kings not to stockpile huge amounts of gold and silver. And what did Solomon do? He did exactly that, but on a scale that completely shattered the spirit of that warning. So what's the big deal? What was the consequence of ignoring that ancient warning? Well, the sermon really gets into what happens when that kind of material abundance becomes your entire reality. What is the true cost of all that gold? The sermon has this brilliant term for it, the anesthetic of affluence. Think about it, like a powerful anesthetic. Overwhelming wealth can just numb you. When you can solve any problem that comes your way just by writing a check, that desperate feeling of needing to rely on something or someone bigger than yourself just starts to fade away. This is such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? Just like silver became as common and worthless as stones in Jerusalem, the sermon warns that our need for faith can also become devalued, overlooked, and just forgotten when we're surrounded by endless material comfort. And in the end, it really seems like Solomon learned this lesson the hard way. The book of Ecclesiastes is widely believed to be him looking back on his life, and what was his final verdict? After a life spent getting everything, he said it was all vanity, just meaningless, empty, like chasing the wind. All the gold cups and ivory thrones couldn't satisfy the deepest hunger of his soul.
And that brings us right to the final, really challenging question the sermon leaves us with. It forces us to turn the camera back on ourselves, on our own lives and our own ambitions and our own resources, whether they're big or small, and ask a tough question. Are they serving a higher purpose? Or are they slowly and maybe quietly becoming the very thing that we serve?